Sometimes the stories we ignore are the ones we need the most. And sometimes the man we walk past every day might be the reason we remember who we really are. The evening air in downtown Sterling City hummed with a deceptive calm. Golden light, rich and inviting, spilled from the massive arched windows of the Gilded Spoon, illuminating a stretch of pristine sidewalk. Inside, the restaurant, famed for its molecular gastronomy and prohibitive prices, was a symphony of hushed conversations, clinking crystal, and the subtle movements of perfectly choreographed servers. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, saffron, and aged wine, a perfume of exclusivity and indulgence. At the edge of this luminous world, just past the valet stand, where polished sedans purred, lay a man. He was barely discernible against the dark brick of the building, a still, wrapped form on the cold concrete. His name was Michael. He was sleeping, curled tightly in a faded army green coat that looked several sizes too large. His feet, bare save for a thin layer of grime, were tucked beneath a patched, equally old sleeping bag. Every night, for weeks now, Michael occupied the same spot. People streamed past him, couples in evening wear, businessmen on their phones, tourists snapping photos of the opulent restaurant facade. Most glanced, most looked away. A quick sidestep, a tightening of the jaw, a hastened pace. He was a piece of static on a perfectly tuned frequency, an inconvenient truth in a meticulously curated urban tableau. Inside the engine of the Gilded Spoon was its owner and manager, David Sterling. Mid-40s, impeccably tailored, with a sharp, angular face and eyes that perpetually scanned for imperfections, David moved through the dining room like a predator in its prime. He caught a hostess lingering near the entrance, her smile a little too soft as her gaze drifted towards the street. "Why is that guy still outside?" David's voice was a low growl, tight with irritation. "He's scaring away customers, tarnishing our image." The hostess, a young woman named Chloe, visibly flinched. "He doesn't bother anyone, Mr. Sterling. Just sleeps." "Not my problem," David snapped, his eyes flashing. "He is a problem. Bad optics. Get him moving, Chloe, or I will." He marched towards the entrance, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor. Stepping outside, he crossed his arms, the scent of expensive cologne clashing with the faint, raw smell of the street. He looked down at Michael, his voice carrying just enough for a few curious passers-by to hear. "This is a private business. You cannot camp here every night. This isn't a shelter." Michael didn't respond, didn't open his eyes. He only pulled his coat slightly tighter, a silent, almost imperceptible withdrawal. David sighed, a gust of frustrated air, and spun on his heel, disappearing back into the golden glow of the restaurant. But someone watched from across the street. Samantha Harding, a 22-year-old journalism student, leaned against her vintage coffee truck. Brew and bloom. She'd seen this exchange, or variations of it, dozens of times. Her fingers, stained with coffee grounds, absently touched the small notepad in her apron pocket. She pulled it out and scribbled. Story idea. The man on Sterling Street. The unseen life outside luxury. A melancholic piano melody, raw and resonant, began to play, weaving through the urban hum. Michael's routine was a silent ballet of survival and dignity. Each morning, before the city truly awoke, he would rise. He never left a mess. His worn sleeping bag, despite its age, was folded with military precision, then tucked neatly behind a dumpster, out of sight. His coat, his only other real possession, was brushed clean of debris. He would pick up a half-eaten sandwich someone had left on a bench, scrutinizing it briefly before taking a measured bite. He never devoured food. He consumed it with a quiet, almost meditative grace. Once, Samantha saw him break off half his meager portion to offer it to a scruffy, three-legged stray dog that sometimes shared his corner, the dog accepting it with a grateful nuzzle. He would walk to a nearby public restroom, not just to relieve himself, but to wash his face and hands. In the cracked mirror, he would look at his reflection, not with despair, but with a strange, unyielding straightness. His shoulders, though thin, would square. His gaze, though tired, held an almost defiant pride. He never begged, never spoke. He just sat, slept, watched. But there was something unbreakable about him, a silence that felt louder than words. Samantha's coffee truck was a familiar sight on the block. Every night, after closing, she'd bring Michael a free cup of her strongest brew. He never said, "Thank you," only offered a brief, almost imperceptible nod. But each time, something in his deep-set eyes softened, a fleeting recognition that warmed his cold world. One particularly chilly morning, David Sterling arrived early to unlock the gilded spoon. He caught sight of Michael, already awake, sitting against the wall, watching the first blush of sunrise paint the skyscrapers. "Still here?" David muttered, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. "You seriously have nowhere else to go?" Michael didn't reply. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, unblinking. David scoffed, walking past. "You're going to end up a news story, you know? One of those man freezes to death outside fancy restaurant headlines. Guess it'll help my Yelp rating." He walked in, letting the heavy oak door close with a thud, cutting off the chill air and the inconvenient sight. Meanwhile, Samantha was already working, notebook in hand, her voice recorder running. She was walking around the neighborhood, speaking to anyone who might know Michael. "Have you ever spoken to the man on the corner?" she asked a grizzled fruit seller, whose stall was just a block away. The vendor shrugged, stacking apples. "Doesn't talk much, but once, during that insane storm last month, he helped me cover my fruit with plastic. The wind was so bad, I thought my whole stand was going to blow away. He just showed up, held the tarp down until I could tie it off, never asked for anything." Next, she approached an old shoe repair man, his hands gnarled by years of stitching leather. "Never asks for handouts," the repairman confirmed. "Fixed my open sign when it fell off its hinges last week. With a bit of wire and a paper clip, just did it, nodded, and walked off. Quiet as a ghost, but helpful as a saint." Samantha's pen flew across her notebook. "There's more to him," she murmured to herself. Michael wasn't asking for help, but maybe someone needed his story. The world moved fast around him, a relentless current of commerce and ambition. But Michael moved like time didn't own him anymore, like he was a quiet island in a churning sea. The gilded spoon pulsed with life. Waiters glided between tables, plates adorned with culinary artistry. Forks clinked, wine flowed, laughter erupted. A particularly boisterous burst from a group of suits at table 4. David, the ever-present sentinel, walked through the dining area, his eyes sweeping. He caught a customer at a window table peering out towards the street, a curious frown on her face. "Hey, who's that guy out there?" the customer asked, gesturing vaguely. David forced a charming yet condescending smile. "Ah, merely a neighborhood vagrant. Shows up every night like clockwork. like a particularly persistent pigeon. The customer half laughed. At least pigeons fly away. Indeed, David replied, his smile tightening. This guy, however, seems stuck to the sidewalk like gum, utterly immovable. A server nearby, Carlos Ramirez, mid-30s, quiet, with a kind face and tired eyes, overheard the exchange. Carlos had worked at the Gilded Spoon for 10 years, seen countless faces, countless interactions. His face darkened, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach. But he said nothing. He simply finished clearing his table, his movements precise and efficient. Later that night, after his shift, Carlos exited the kitchen, his apron slung over his shoulder. He saw Michael near the dumpsters, meticulously folding his sleeping bag. Michael noticed him, offered that single economical nod. Carlos hesitated, then walked over, a half-eaten chicken sandwich from the staff meal in a paper bag. "You okay out here?" Carlos asked, his voice low and genuine. Michael looked up, his eyes meeting Carlos's. "I'm always okay." His voice was a low rasp, unused to speaking. "I've worked in this place 10 years, Carlos continued. "Seen you here for weeks. Nobody knows your name." "Michael?" "Carlos," he replied, extending a hand briefly. "You want half a sandwich? It's still warm." Michael eyed the sandwich, a flicker of something, hunger perhaps, crossing his face. Then he shook his head. "Give it to the kid who hangs by the parking lot. He's hungrier than me." Carlos paused, surprised by the selflessness. Then, without another word, he held it out again. "Take it, or give it to him yourself. Just take it." After a long moment, Michael's hand, calloused and rough, reached out and accepted the offering. A silent pact formed between them. Samantha was on her second cup of coffee from her truck, scribbling notes in her journal. The puzzle of Michael consumed her. She finished her last entry for the night, took a deep breath, and finally walked across the street. She knelt beside Michael, tea in hand. "You ever talk to people?" Samantha asked, her voice soft but direct. "Or just drink the coffee I bring you?" Michael's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible half-smile. "You ask a lot of questions." "I'm a journalist," Samantha replied, sensing a breakthrough, or trying to be. "You've been here for weeks. People say you never ask for help, that you helped them." Michael looked away, his gaze distant. "Why write about someone like me?" "Because everyone sees you," Samantha insisted gently. "But no one knows you. And I think people need to know you." Michael was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice dropped, carrying the weight of untold stories. Sometimes being seen is the scariest part. There it was, the truth under the blanket. He wasn't hiding because he was weak. He was hiding because, once, he was something else. Someone else entirely. A soft, melancholic piano score began to play, weaving a narrative through the quiet night. We saw Michael as he once was, in a sharp, impeccably tailored business suit, standing confidently at a podium, delivering a presentation on a complex architectural design to a rapt audience. He was articulate, commanding, vibrant. His name, Michael Dubois, gleamed on a projected slide. Sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room, a younger, healthier woman, his wife Sarah, resting her head on his shoulder. He held her hand tightly, his face etched with worry, but also fierce love. A frantic phone call. Michael, alone in a sprawling, elegant home, collapsing to his knees, the phone clattering from his grasp, his body racked with a silent, devastating grief. Sarah was gone. An empty home, furniture covered in white sheets, a foreclosure sign hammered into the manicured lawn. Michael walking out the front door for the last time, a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder, wearing the very same army green coat, a shell of his former self. Back in her small apartment, Samantha was hunched over her laptop, typing the first draft of her article, the words flowing effortlessly now that Michael had finally opened a sliver of his past. On the screen, the working title, "The Man They Don't See, the Story of Michael Dubois on Sterling Street." She paused, reading over her last poignant line. He lost everything, yet offers kindness to everyone. She picked up her phone, eyes gleaming with determination. "Hey, Eleanor," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "It's Sam. I need your help. You still got connections at the Morning Ledger? I've got a story." The next morning, before the dinner service began, David Sterling addressed his team in the gleaming stainless steel kitchen of the Gilded Spoon. His jaw was tight, his eyes narrowed. "New rule," David announced, his voice clipped and cold. "No talking to the guy outside. No giving him food. No handouts. It sets a bad image. It encourages them." Carlos, who had been meticulously polishing a stack of wine glasses, slowly lowered his rag. "What image, Mr. Sterling?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "One of compassion?" David scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Professionalism. Class. This is a Michelin star kitchen, Carlos, not a soup line. We cater to an exclusive clientele. We don't need a derelict turning our entrance into his personal campsite." Carlos stood up, his posture ramrod straight, defying David's intimidation. "You know, he used to be one of us?" David laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed off the metal surfaces. "What? He was head chef at the Ritz? Come on, Carlos?" "No," Carlos retorted, his voice gaining strength. "He ran a logistics firm. Dubois and Partners. A huge, successful company. Lost his wife to cancer. Lost his house. Lost everything. He's seen life from the top, Mr. Sterling, and still treats people better than you do, even from the bottom." A stunned silence fell over the kitchen. Cooks froze. Servers exchanged uneasy glances. The revelation hung heavy in the air. David's face, usually so composed, flushed an angry red. "Anyone else have opinions?" David sneered, his gaze sweeping over the silent staff. No one spoke, but several faces looked away, an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. 2 days later, the Morning Ledger hit the streets. Samantha found Michael that evening, huddled in his usual spot, the faint glow of the street lamp catching his face. She approached him, a folded copy of the paper in her hand. She placed it gently beside him. He hesitated, then his hand, surprisingly steady, reached out and unfolded the broadsheet. The headline, stark and impactful, blared, "The Gentleman of Sterling Street, a story of quiet strength." Below, a powerful black and white photograph by Samantha herself. Michael looking up, his gaze holding that unbreakable dignity, folding his blanket beside the bistro wall, the opulence of the Gilded Spoon a blurry backdrop. Michael's eyes scanned the words, his lips moving almost imperceptibly. He read the story of his past, his architectural firm, Sarah, the devastating loss, the slow slide into homelessness, and the quiet acts of kindness that defined his present. He read of the fruit vendor and the shoe repairman, of Carlos's quiet offerings, and of Samantha's tea. "You wrote this?" His voice was barely a whisper, thick with emotion. Samantha nodded, her own eyes glistening. "Every word. People need to see what grace looks like, what resilience looks like, even when the world passes it by." For the first time since Samantha had met him, tears welled in Michael's eyes. Not the tears of despair or self-pity, but of profound recognition. They tracked paths through the grime on his cheeks, glistening like ancient rivers. "I used to write speeches," Michael said, his voice raw. "Thought I'd be remembered for my words, for the buildings I designed." "Maybe now you will be," Samantha whispered. And just like that, the man no one saw became impossible to ignore. The sun rose slowly over Sterling Street. The coffee truck whirred to life. Workers swept storefronts. People stopped, lingered near the Gilded Spoon, some openly pointing, a few holding copies of the Morning Ledger. But something was missing. Michael's usual spot, vacant, no blanket, no bag, no folded coat. Nothing. The cold, gray pavement where he had slept for weeks stretched empty and silent. Samantha walked over with a fresh cup of coffee, her usual evening ritual. She froze, the steaming cup clutched in her hand. "Michael?" Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the morning quiet. She set the cup down gently on the bare pavement, as if expecting him to materialize, to appear out of thin air and accept his offering. But the air remained empty. Inside the Gilded Spoon, Carlos entered the kitchen, his brows furrowed with worry. He stopped when he saw David at his desk, staring blankly at the crumpled newspaper on his surface. "He's gone," Carlos stated, his voice flat. David looked up, his face still etched with residual anger from the article. "Who?" "Michael," Carlos replied impatiently. David shrugged, tossing the newspaper down. "Maybe he finally found the curb somewhere else. Good riddance, honestly. My PR team is dealing with a nightmare right now." Carlos took a step closer, his voice low with disappointment. "You don't get it, do you?" David slammed his hand on the desk. "What am I supposed to do, Carlos? Put out a missing persons report? The guy wanted to disappear. He chose this life." "He deserved more than this," Carlos insisted, his voice aching. "No one owes anyone anything," David retorted, his voice hardening. Carlos shook his head, a wave of profound sadness washing over him. He turned and walked away. But his silence felt louder than any argument, a thunderous accusation in the stark kitchen. Days blurred into a frantic search for Samantha. She scrolled through her phone, checking city shelters, local ER records, news reports. Nothing. It was as if Michael had simply dissolved into the city air. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello?" A voice, gentle, tired, yet undeniably familiar, answered. "You wrote the story." "Michael?" Samantha's breath hitched. "Don't look for me." Michael's voice was calm, resolute. "I needed you to see me. Now I need you to let me go." Click. The line went dead. Samantha clutched her phone, tears blurring her vision. He was alive. He was okay. But he was gone. Meanwhile, David was in his office, alone. He was scrolling through Samantha's article on his computer, the words a bitter echo in the quiet room. He paused on a paragraph. And even as the world passed him by, Michael folded his blanket every morning with dignity. A man who lost everything, except grace. David leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to an old, dusty photo frame on his desk. It was a picture of a man, younger, with a beaming little boy in a Little League uniform. Michael. And David. His father. He opened a drawer and pulled out a letter. It was old, yellowed, and unopened. Handwritten. Stamped. The return address was Michael's old address, long gone. He hadn't looked at it in years. A sharp, painful memory flashed through David's mind. Young David, in a cheap suit, yelling into a phone, his face contorted with youthful rage. Flashback. Years ago. "I'm not taking him in!" young David screamed into the receiver, pacing his tiny, cluttered apartment. "He made his choices. I'm done cleaning up after him." A distorted voice on the phone crackled. "He's your father, David." David slammed the phone down, shaking with fury and a deep, festering shame. He hated the weakness he saw in his father, the way his father had let everything crumble after Sarah died, disappearing into a fog of grief and despair, losing his business, his home, his life. David, fiercely independent, had cut ties, choosing to build his own success on the ruins of his father's failures. Present, now, David sat on the cold concrete where Michael used to sleep, a raw, exposed nerve. The silence of the empty space was deafening. He opened the letter. His hands trembled. Inside, Michael's familiar, precise handwriting, older and shakier now. David, I don't want anything from you, not money, not apologies, just the hope that someday, when you see me, you'll remember the boy I raised, not the mistakes I made. You were always good, even when I wasn't. Keep being that. Love. Dad. David broke. Quiet, ragged sobs tore through him. He clutched the letter to his chest, his jaw trembling uncontrollably. His father, in his destitution, had never asked for anything. But in his quiet presence, and now his absence, he had left David with everything he needed to remember, to truly see. Later that day, David stood in front of his kitchen staff, the usual bravado completely gone. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed. I owe you all an apology," David began, his voice raspy. Everyone stopped moving. The clatter of pots, the sizzle of pans, the murmurs of conversation, all ceased. Silence, thick and heavy, descended upon the gleaming kitchen. David took a deep, shuddering breath. "About Michael. I lied. He wasn't just some guy on the sidewalk. He was my father." A quiet gasp rippled through the staff. Carlos, standing closest, felt a cold dread mix with a dawning understanding. "Your father?" Carlos whispered, his voice incredulous. David nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet their eyes. "I hated what he became. I hated seeing him there. I thought pretending he didn't exist made me stronger, made me better. But now I'd give anything to take one more meal with him, to just sit with him." He turned abruptly, walking off towards his office, leaving the kitchen in stunned silence. A new weight filled the room, a quiet, profound understanding. The dynamic of the gilded spoon, once so rigid and stratified, had subtly but irrevocably shifted. Samantha finished brewing a final batch of coffee at her truck, lost in thought. Carlos approached her, his face etched with a new kind of weariness. "He told us," Carlos said, his voice low, "about Michael being his dad." Samantha looked at him, her eyes soft. "I figured. The way David looked at him sometimes, it wasn't just disgust. It was shame, Shame mixed with something else. Fear, maybe. "Do you think he's okay?" Carlos asked, looking out at the spot where Michael had slept. Samantha sighed. "No, I don't think he's okay. Not yet, but maybe that's the point. Some people have to break to become human again, to truly see." A new series of flashbacks unfolded in David's mind. Sharper, clearer now, untainted by resentment. Flashback 1. Young Michael, vibrant and full of life, helping a beaming little David with a science fair project. A bubbling volcano. "You don't give up just because it's hard, Davy," Michael's voice, warm and encouraging. "You keep showing up. That's what men do. That's how you build something that lasts." Young David nodded, beaming, idolizing his father. Flashback 2. Years later. David, now a hardened teen, visiting Michael in a bleak rehab center. Michael, gaunt but hopeful, reached out a hand. David pulled away, his face a mask of anger and hurt. "Son, I'm trying," Michael pleaded. "You keep trying too late," teen David snapped, spinning on his heel and walking out, never looking back. Present. Weeks later, Samantha received a mysterious envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a single, crisp photograph. It was Michael, younger, in a sharp business suit, standing proudly in front of an office building that read, "Dubois and Partners Logistics." On the back, written in black pen, "You only fall as far as your own pride will drop you. Thank you for seeing me." Tears formed in Samantha's eyes. A single, choked whisper escaped her lips. "He's alive." The photograph wasn't a clue to his whereabouts, but a confirmation of his peace. A final, profound thank you. Carlos, ever observant, noticed an elderly woman at table 3, a regular named Mrs. Gable, looking around the dining room with a curious, searching expression. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Carlos asked gently. "This used to be my son's favorite restaurant," Mrs. Gable said, her voice soft with memory. "We came here every Tuesday." "Oh yeah? Does he still come around?" Carlos inquired. She shook her head slowly, a sad smile touching her lips. "He passed away last year. My Robert. Heart attack." She paused, then her eyes brightened faintly. "But I heard a story in the paper recently about a man named Michael who slept outside. The story mentioned he helped a boy pick up a dropped wallet full of change one day. That was my son, Robert. He never told me who helped him. But that story, it gave me peace, knowing someone saw him, saw his kindness, even then." Carlos smiled softly, a lump in his throat. Michael helped more people than anyone realized. Outside the Gilded Spoon, where Michael had once slept, a new addition appeared. A simple, elegant wooden bench, discreetly placed against the wall, yet clearly intended for sitting. It was made of polished dark wood, sturdy and inviting. David had arranged for it not as a monument, but as a silent apology, a lasting tribute. One evening, David sat on the concrete beside the new bench, where his father had once slept. He held the unopened letter again, the one Michael had sent years ago. This time, he read it out loud, his voice soft and trembling in the quiet night. "I don't expect to be forgiven, Davy. Just remembered. You were always good, even when I wasn't. Keep being that." He folded the letter carefully, then placed it gently on the ledge of the bench, where Michael once rested his head. A small, silent offering of peace. In a small-town library, far from the bustling streets of Sterling City, a librarian stamped books. as a man walked in quietly. We only saw him from behind, the worn charcoal coat, the familiar, dignified walk. He carried a stack of well-used books, classics mostly. He donated them to the library. One of them fell open on the counter. On the inside cover, Property of Dubois and Partners Architectural Library, M.D. The librarian looked up, a flicker of recognition in her eyes from the newspaper photo. The man gave a quiet nod, a subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledging of her gaze, and then he turned and walked back out into the morning light, disappearing down a quiet street. You can leave the city. You can leave your past. But if you leave kindness behind, it always finds its way home. Sometimes, it's not a man's physical presence that changes a place. It's the echo of his absence. The Michael bench now had fresh flowers every morning, placed there by unseen hands, sometimes Carlos, sometimes a new server, sometimes a grateful patron. The small brass plaque David had eventually added shone in the sun, simply engraved, "For Michael Dubois. He saw us. We see him." Inside, David now sat at the manager's desk, staring not at stock reports, but at a framed photograph. Young Michael with little David at a baseball game, arms around each other, grinning. A handwritten note underneath read, "He showed up, even when he didn't." David walked into the dining room, apron on. His stride was still confident, but the sharp edges had softened. He now greeted each guest with something Michael had never received here: dignity, a warm smile, an open presence. He saw them. One afternoon, a young girl hesitantly approached Samantha's coffee truck. She was holding a small handwritten note, folded many times over. "My uncle told me to give this to you," the girl whispered, her eyes wide. "He said you'd understand." Samantha took the note, her heart racing. She opened it. It read, "Thank you for seeing me, for listening, for not trying to fix me, just honor me. I'm where I need to be. No city, no noise, just silence and sky. Tell David I remember his science fair project. It was the only volcano I ever believed in." Samantha smiled tearfully, a profound sense of peace washing over her. She looked up, but the girl was gone, a wisp of a messenger. Later, at her quiet apartment, Samantha rewound the voice recorder, listening to Michael's voice again, a voice she had barely heard in person. "They look at us like we're failures," Michael's voice echoed, gentle, tired, yet firm. "But sometimes, we're just people who got tired, lost something that couldn't be replaced, and decided to keep going anyway." She listened again to the next clip, a profound truth in his simple words. "I was a father. I still am, even if he won't say it." David stepped outside the Gilded Spoon, carrying a paper bag with 2 takeout meals from the restaurant. He sat on the Michael bench, the cool evening air a balm on his face. He ate one meal slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. Then he placed the other meal beside him on the bench, with a neatly folded napkin on top. A stranger walked by, glancing curiously at David and the lone meal on the bench. "You expecting someone?" the stranger asked, a slight smile on his face. David looked out at the street, a peaceful, knowing smile touching his lips. "Yeah, someday." In the quiet, small town, Michael walked to his mailbox. Inside, a small, unassuming envelope with no stamp. He opened it. A single line, written in familiar, precise handwriting. "You showed up. That was enough." Michael exhaled slowly, a long, weary breath. Then, quietly, he broke into tears. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his pocket. A treasure found. We thought this was a story about a homeless man, but it was really a story about everyone else, about how they saw him and who they became after he was gone. He didn't need a house to matter. He didn't need a title to be remembered. He just needed to be seen. And now, maybe, so do we. Based on thousands of untold stories. If you see someone like Michael, don't look away. See them. Act of depth.